Hello and welcome to the Look-See for mid-December 2024 on this really cold and chilly day in West Michigan. So this is the last month of the year, and it looks like it's going to be a pretty good one in terms of people feeling a bit of normalcy in their lives. At the same time, there are some big and interesting things happening on the ground and in the skies. So we definitely won't be bored. As usual, there's a lot happening in our world, almost too much to keep track of. I think I say that every month. But before we begin, someone wrote and commented that I wasn't doing the look-see the way that I used to. They said it was more of a commentary on current events. And that's true. Why? For over 40 years, I think 44 years now, I have been seeing and saying the same things that are now happening. So how many times and how many ways can I say the same things again and again before even I get bored with the whole thing? So things change so slowly when it comes to a civilization. And since I'm really not interested in the day-to-day trivia, it's slow going. It's very slow going as we wait for real change, positive change to occur. Anyway, because of this, I got to the point of thinking I was going to stop doing the look-sees altogether. However, a good friend of mine commented that people often don't know how to handle the news about what is happening in the world. And they could use some help with critical thinking, learning to look behind the curtain, getting to the point of realizing that everything happening is connected to everything else. So she suggested that I look at everyday news and events and present new perspectives and new ways to view and think about that news. So the look-see changed. And I brought this up quite a while ago, but I'll say it again. The look-see is a combination of what I see coming via direct remote viewing, of what's happening out there that we can all see, as well as how to wrap your mind around that information and figure out how to be with that information. So hopefully you will use the look-see to prepare yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually for the work of living, because it's a lot of work. And of helping those others, yourselves, everybody to shape a new world. And especially the task of helping those who are not prepared and are going to need a smile, a helping hand, or a word of encouragement as we all go forward together. Okay? So with all that in mind, let's begin. Number one, I started out this month's look-see doing what I often do, which is to ask, what is the overall tone or mood of the next month? And then I close my eyes and I let a scene appear. The scene this month was of a broad landscape in a valley that was surrounded by mountains. The landscape was very quiet, and it was covered with a heavy fog. A single bare tree stood in the middle of the landscape, and a lone figure was moving through the fog. So that was the whole scene. So I took this to mean that, generally speaking, this month will be relatively quiet, even though we are surrounded by challenges, big challenges. That's those mountains. And fog is something that is created when there is a drastic change in the temperature in the atmosphere. And the fog here is telling us of a drastic change of some kind. fog also symbolizes not seeing things clearly. So we may not be able to get our minds around the drastic change, either because we can't or because we don't want to. The tree, that tree symbolizes the family of humanity, indicating that the drastic change will impact all of us. And the lone figure moving through the fog, he says or it represents that we will continue going about our daily lives somewhat normally without letting uncertainty or what I'll call a lack of clarity get in our way. However, that lone figure indicates that people will be feeling quite alone and perhaps have withdrawn a bit or become quite introspective. In fact, if there is a key word for this month, I would say it is introspection, looking within. Keep in mind that we are not alone. So I would say to enjoy Christmas and the holidays as much as possible. Go about your life as if all is well, because at this moment, it is. And we need to learn to enjoy these moments when they come, because all things change. Number 2. Someone wrote and accused me of lying when I said I was apolitical. And then started the last look-see with an acknowledgement of the election and return of Donald Trump. That was a statement of fact. Trump was elected. He was elected and he will be returning. That statement was followed by the observation that we should look at what we have accomplished by coming together to use our power. Now, when you put those two statements together, it sounded like I was all for Donald Trump. But what I was trying to highlight was not so much about Trump. It was what can be accomplished when we come together, even in something as tricky and unreliable as an election. I did think that Trump was certainly a better choice than Harris, but I am apolitical in the sense that I don't vote, I don't belong to political parties, and I don't care for their attempts to get people to pledge allegiance to their agendas. However, that said, in this country, we do have leaders, and they're called presidents, senators, representatives. Now, people do not want to see or live with poor leadership, and I don't either. I think most would prefer someone who's decent, who's honest, and responsive to the wishes of the people. So I will say who I think the better choice is, but my base set of preferences is for the people to lead themselves, not some political figure or personality in control of everything. And it bothers me immensely to watch our court system refuse to investigate legitimate evidence and concerns. Anyway, caring about good leaders and an honest court is not being political. It's just using common sense. Number 3. As I've mentioned in the past, I've been following that war in Ukraine quite closely ever since it began. When Biden gave permission to Ukraine to use long-range missiles to bomb deeper into Russia's interior, I was concerned. And I went looking to see what the outcome of this permission would be. In my mind, I thought it could easily lead to the defeat of Russia or maybe nuclear war. But what I saw was that it led to Russia becoming the leader of the world. As I looked at this and wondered how that happened, I heard what sounded like a news report or an analysis from the future, actually, saying that the U.S. failed to take into account the fact that Russia and China were much older civilizations and had learned to play the game in a much smarter, more savvy way. While the U.S. kept relying on brute strength, Russia and China were relying on finessing a strategy of decoys and enticements that would turn those U.S. efforts right back onto themselves, right back onto the U.S. Initially, the U.S. would celebrate, kind of secretly, the fall of Syria, but in the midst of their celebration, they would suddenly realize their mistake. So whatever this mistake was, it would bring them defeat in Syria and the Middle East. It looked like the defeat was due to poor strategy. The U.S. thought they could push Russia into making some desperate moves that would include the use of nuclear weapons. They thought Russia might be weak enough and desperate enough that perhaps a two-pronged attack would finish them off. One side of this two-pronged attack was allowing Ukraine to bomb deeply into Russia. And the other was the distraction of renewed attacks on Syria, a country that Russia had been protecting. The hope was that Russia would divide its troops and send some of them to Syria, weakening their efforts in Ukraine. And that didn't happen. In fact, Assad left Syria and went to Russia. His army offered almost no resistance to the invaders, and the terrorist group, HTS, carrying out the invasion, just waltzed right through the entire country, taking city after city in a matter of a few days, sometimes without even a fight. That is quite surprising. So whatever the U.S. mistake is, in the long run, the result may be that Russia becomes the leader of the world. Since Russia is a Christian nation, is not interested in or tolerant of the gender games, does not have an out-of-control spending habit or a huge debt in the trillions of dollars, and was described by Edgar Cayce as, quote, the hope of the world, end quote. Maybe Russia becoming the leader of the free world is not a bad outcome, except in the minds of the neocons. Number 4, Israel's difficulties continue to multiply. Their invasion and takeover of the Golan Heights in Syria, they had to grab that little part for themselves when the guys from up top started. Anyway, their invasion and takeover of the Golan Heights in Syria does not last. People leave Israel by the thousands. And when they leave, many do not tell anyone in their new location that they're Jewish. It's as if they want to leave that whole religious identity behind. That's big. They just want some place with a quieter future. Jewish-owned corporations also suffer a serious downturn, and even the Jewish religion itself is struggling to regroup. And I also saw that there was more than one attack on Jewish synagogues. Number 5, NATO and the West have gone from trying to protect and support Ukraine to trying to protect themselves and their own regimes. It almost looks like NATO is egging on Russia in an effort to make sure that as much evidence as possible is erased regarding bioweapons research, child trafficking, adrenochrome, slave trafficking, and clone production. They want all of that to be wiped out. And as soon as they're sure that all this evidence is gone, it looks like the war comes to an end. Number 6. I was looking at the population of the US in the last half of December, especially over the 23rd through the 29th. And for the most part, people seemed quite laid back, even contented. I haven't seen that in a while. The issues around the election were kind of like a distant memory, and problems in Ukraine and Syria just felt far away. There was a lot of talk about UFOs and the drones appearing around the world, but also there was this expectation of a great future, and most people felt it was a good Christmas. Just as I was about to close out of this scene, I heard the words, "the calm before the storm." I also saw that something very critical had happened on the 23rd, maybe the 23rd, 24th of December, but it was not public. I had the impression that it was something political or maybe an invasion of some sort, but it was something that would benefit the American people in the long run. So we'll see what happens. The calm before the storm. Number 7. Because of that message, the calm before the storm, I decided I had to go looking at that first week in January. It looked fairly quiet. I saw 2 hands and a handshake, and I was aware, I had the impression that some kind of deal was being agreed to. Then I continued to watch, and I had the feeling of a shift, and that something was about to end or be cut off. Perhaps a line was drawn in the sand, but whatever it represented, a few days later, the deal was off. There was disbelief and a sense of betrayal, but this seemed to be happening among people in the government, not the general population. So, number 8, I went ahead another week to see what might be happening in reference to the handshake that didn't last very long. And I saw a pair of lips, his mouth wide open and shouting. The setting was private, it was almost cloistered. And I had the feeling of, oh dear, disagreement already. Then I saw a letter of resignation, and that letter was accompanied by resentment. The resentment seemed to be around oil and food, or oil or food, maybe both, but maybe one or the other, and had something to do with the truth coming out. And the person handing in the letter of resignation had the attitude, I didn't come here to deal with this. Number 9, I moved ahead to the first week of February, and the first thing I saw was a teardrop, and then many tears, as if tragedy had struck. As I looked around, I could smell gunpowder, and then I saw blood, and someone lying on the ground with his arm all crooked, all wonky. And I could feel anger, and I had the thought, another assassination? The word vigilante came to me, and I looked around to see if I could tell where this was happening. I saw a bathroom door, and it was to the men's bathroom. Hello, man graphic on it. I could also hear music, and the body was lying in this long hallway. I wondered if it was a conference center or a concert center, but it was in a city on a river, and I could feel a sense of law and order being out of order. So that was the end of that scene. Number 10. The most recent count of the number of people employed by the U.S. government was 2.87 million people. The number of people employed by the 50 state governments across the U.S. was 19.58 million. That is a total of 22.45 million people. As Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy get going with their Department of Government Efficiency, about 2.2 million of those federal employees are going to be out of a job. About 16 million state workers will face the same fate. That's a lot of unemployment. A lot of agencies that won't be working smoothly, if at all, and a lot of frustrated citizens waiting for paperwork. I've said this before, but I'm saying it again, this time I hope with more pressure. It's vitally important for you to have copies of your birth certificate, your mortgage papers, your bank statements, your driver's license and registration, your car, property, and health insurance, and something that shows ownership of planes, boats, cars, and other big equipment. Take the time to gather those things now, along with copies of 2 or 3 bills with your name on them. For example, your water bill, your phone bill, your electric bill, or similar documents. We are going to have a bit of disruption, and you might need to prove or be able to prove who you are and what is yours. Save yourself a headache and get your paperwork in order. Number 11. There have been some pretty panicky criticisms of Trump's choices of cabinet members. So just for the record, I thought I would list some of them here, along with a few thoughts and bits of intuition that came with each. So Kristi Noem of South Dakota for Department of Homeland Security, because the Dakotas are under consideration as a target for a new capital of the U.S., Canada, Mexico Union. Marco Rubio for Secretary of State, because he's a really hawkish guy and one who is one-sided enough to be a hard man to deal with. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for Department of Health and Human Services, because we can no longer find healthy men needed for the armed forces. Something has to change there. Tom Homan for Border Czar, because he's one of the very few willing to deport people and whole families. He will create uproar. Susie Wiles, Chief of Staff, because she is an intuitive maven, is one of the few who will stand up to Trump and go toe-to-toe with him and win. Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense, because he knows the games and therefore he talks a good game, although his drinking problem is likely to get worse and cause problems. Elise Stefanik for Ambassador to the UN, because she is in tune with a greater segment of the population outside the big cities, and she has her finger on the pulse of American life instead of American politics. and she will work toward bringing the U.S., Canada, and Mexico together. Kash Patel for FBI director because he is smart and sharp and will whittle down the FBI as well as prosecute those who misuse their power, and because he still has some of that patriot power that Americans have long since lost. Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence because she's a populist at heart, a tough woman, and one who is willing to throw away old playbooks, as well as Democrats and their playbooks. Doug Collins for Department of Veterans Affairs because he is fierce but humane, and because we have to take care of those we ask to fight for our country, or we won't be able to attract new recruits into the military. John Ratcliffe, director of the CIA, because he intends to dismantle much of it. He's also more of a partisan player than Democrats, and they complain because he plays their kind of games almost better than they do. Mike Waltz, retired colonel and former Green Beret, for National Security Advisor, because he knows how to be stealthy and carry out counterattacks. And he sees China for what it is trying to become, which is the next United States type controller of the world. Robert Lighthizer for the Department of the Treasury, because Trump needs a few friends in the right places. Linda McMahon for the Department of Education, because she will wrestle the teachers' union into a completely different shape and work herself right out of a job. Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk for Office of Government Efficiency, because Trump needed a team of people who were willing to take the blame for collapsing the government. And they are. Doug Burgum of North Dakota for Department of the Interior, for the same reason Kristi Noem was chosen. Maybe we're going to have a capital of the U.S. or North America, Mexico, Canada Union in that area. Joel Salatin, advisor to the USDA, because he's in complete alignment with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He knows organic farming inside out, and he will have a much bigger impact than anyone expects. Brooke Rollins for Department of Agriculture, because she's young, passionate, vocal, grew up on a farm, and is also in alignment with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. She is wrongly assessed as not having any policy-making experience, but she is going to turn out to be a fierce and adept policy maker that helps to shrink the U.S. government. Pam Bondi for U.S. Attorney General, because she really doesn't like crime or criminals, including the crimes of Democrats, rhinos, those who played with elections, and those who flaunted election or immigration laws. Both of those, actually. Watch out. So some of these people are committed Zionists. Some will likely be a bit fierce for American tastes, and a few will have an absolutely overwhelming impact in their work. All of them will do their damnedest to salvage the America we once knew. I don't know that we'll be able to do that, and some will quit along the way, but the rest will pick up the scraps of our country and their experience from these roles and use these in their own regions as everything reforms and reorganizes. Number 12. As things come apart in the Western countries, we are going to hear more and more stories about sexual abuse, misogyny, and the awful state of relationships between men and women. Whether we look at what is going on in corporate settings, the national sports organizations, churches, synagogues, mosques, or government institutions, there is something wrong with men who do not know how to behave when it comes to the sexual aspect of life, and women who do not know how to respond when it comes to sexual teasing or harassment. We have to grow up. We cannot continue to throw accusations of sex at everyone we don't like. Everyone wants to be loved and appreciated. When people are filled up, they feel heard. They feel recognized and cared for. The epidemic of sexual behavior is a clear sign that we have a lot of empty people running around the country trying to fill big gaps in their sense of self. This continues to grow into a crisis, especially as we move into the middle of 2025. We're going to have to deal with that, people. Number 13. Those who like to pretend they are weather gods are having a real blast this year. Every time I look at the weather, I see enhanced storms pounding people everywhere. Of course, the weather people always blame it on something that will give them plausible deniability, like climate change, El Nino, La Niña, atmospheric rivers with cute names, unexplainable droughts that last for decades, hurricanes that change their mind about where they're going and end up in the middle of a country, ice storms in the desert, heat waves in the Arctic, lightning strikes that start fires when there are no storms, unheard of winds that fan fires into regional blast furnaces, sonic booms when there are no airplanes. Have we completely lost any sense of what is natural and not natural? Number 14. I was sort of watching the conversation and the dealings between two grocery chains, Kroger and Albertsons, for a while now. I wasn't watching all that closely, but over the past 6 months, I was aware that they were making arrangements to merge. Albertsons is heavily in debt, and they really wanted that merger. But opposition in both Colorado and Washington state sued, saying the merger was not good for competition. It would raise prices, and that Kroger had to divest itself of some of its stores and its assets. The whole thing went to court, and two different judges, one in the U.S. District Court and the other in Superior Court, blocked the whole thing permanently. Instead of appealing the ruling, which Albertsons could have done, they pulled out of the whole deal. Then, after they pulled out, they turned around and accused Kroger of not doing enough to make the merger happen. They said Kroger was self-serving, and they decided they were going to sue their once would-be partner for $600 million in termination fees, plus billions in legal fees spent trying to make the deal happen since 2022. I had to laugh out loud when I read that Albertsons pulled out, but then accused Kroger of not doing enough. 3 things struck me about this whole thing. One is how often we sue one another as a cover for our own shortcomings. The second was that Albertsons was going to try and squeeze enough money out of Kroger via suing in order to seriously reduce their $8 billion debt. And the third was having myself personally experienced how sneaky and underhanded businesses and legal bodies can be. I wondered if someone in the background paid the judges to rule as they did. This is exactly what the big competitors like Walmart, Costco, or Amazon will do. Or are we looking at signs that the end of the big mergers is here, which signals the beginning of the end of the big transnationals? We have to watch, see what happens. Number 15. When I first heard about the shooting of the United Healthcare Insurance CEO, my first thought was, uh-oh, the revenge of the people has started. When I first heard that the authorities were looking for the shooter, my first thought was, uh-oh, they're looking for someone to pin the murder on. When I first heard that they had a suspect, I went to see who they had and saw his photo. My first impression of him was that he looked sort of rough and mangy, but my whole intuition was that he was not the one they should be looking at. The whole thing felt like a setup. There will probably be more to come on this topic, but the caution for other CEOs would be, if you collaborated with the deep state in any way, they will arrange to get rid of you once they're done using you. Watch out. Number 16. As I watch reports multiply of sightings of what are being called drones around the US and elsewhere in the world, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Mainstream news has called these lights UAPs and tries to present them as the new label for UFOs. As a side note, why do you suppose they changed the name from UFO to UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena? It's because they needed some way to differentiate between the aerial phenomena they were planning to create and use and the true UFOs. That said, I think we need to be really quiet and watch and collect information. Those drones, quote unquote drones, do not look like drones at all, nor do they look like real UFOs. Yet some of the videos present craft that do look real. So we have a complexity right there, and something that can easily become a point of confusion. Some of the drones can be heard, but this fact is incompatible with 75 years of UFO observation in which all of the craft are silent, absolutely silent. And to be honest, I can't see the ETs manufacturing hundreds of noisy pieces of equipment just to impress us as they try to introduce themselves. Some of the drones have been filmed and they're quite exotic looking, and they strike me as something out of some engineer's imagination, more like a Hollywood production than a real UFO. Generally, also, showing up and hovering is not how ETs act, because they are likely to be chased and shot down by military. Some people have said, oh, but they're trying to introduce themselves, and that is plausible. However, it's just as likely that the US and Western governments want to stop lying to us about the ET presence, and this is how they're trying to introduce the fact that we are not alone in the cosmos, something most of us already know. Then we have the situation in which one of the drones crashed and burned in a New Jersey field. If I were an ET trying to show up and introduce myself, my people, and my advanced technology, only to have my equipment crash and burn, it would not make a very good impression. This incident is very disturbing and makes it really difficult to believe that these are ETs trying to get to know us. Regarding the whole situation, the timing is uncanny in that it just lines up too perfectly with the stories of a fake alien invasion. If it really is ET technology, why would the US government be silent? What kind of leadership is that? I thought they were here to protect us. For the mainstream media to be either silent or to act like they don't know what's happening, that's just disingenuous. We all know that ETs are here, and we've all heard the stories about fake alien invasions. We aren't stupid. For the censors to be telling people to take down the video recordings of the recent drone crash and fire smacks of 9/11. And the refusal to air any videos except the official ones. All of this strikes me as part of the let's pretend we don't know what these are. Let's treat this like we treated everything we wanted to brand as conspiracy theory. Let's pretend the people, or let's let the people stir themselves up into a frenzy over this until no one can think straight about it, and then we can introduce the answer we want them to have. You know, ET groups do want to be accepted and recognized as inhabitants of Earth, but they don't want to antagonize or tease or behave in ways that trigger the trigger-happy humans that live here. They have tried to get governments to acknowledge them and share that information with the public. But governments have been too afraid they would lose power, so they have continued to deny and lie. ETs that are worth dealing with respect the laws that prevent contact with a lesser evolved civilization. If these are duplicitous ETs, and our government is not saying much about their presence, have we already been sold down the river? If they are not duplicitous ETs, then we should know that our governments have developed advanced technologies because they're coming on. These ETs would not be doing that if we did not have advanced technologies. This makes it legal for them to contact us directly because we're no longer considered a lesser developed civilization. As we move forward, keep your wits about you and be aware that this entire drone story, it just looks like some kind of hybrid invention with enough real ET footage thrown in to make you believe it's all real. It's not. And learning to sort out the truth from invented fantasies is a big part of becoming an advanced civilization. Maybe we are watching the early stages of the long foretold alien invasion, but why now? Is it because the real invasion happening is the one trying to take over human DNA and consciousness? The current wave of UAPs is a mighty distraction from where we should be looking. Number 17. In looking at leadership in Russia, I am concerned about the future of Vladimir Putin. I have, in the past, occasionally seen assassination attempts on his life, but they've always been the kind of attempts that were really quiet, out of the public eye. And thus it was possible to come up with a replacement and keep the Putin image and presence going. Now I'm seeing something public, an attempt to do away with quiet assassinations and replacements in the form of clones or lookalikes. And it looks more like a John F. Kennedy type public assassination done in an attempt to get someone in place who will use nuclear weapons. If this is successful, it will be the end of the Putin story. But it also looks like it will be the end of the war in Ukraine, greatly frustrating those who want nuclear war. Wow. Number 18. In my book, Robes, the Little Men in Brown Robes, talked about the age of the automobile. I think this is from page 184. Also, here's a brief excerpt. Thus, a number of troubling forces will be working at one time. The shortages of food and water, decreasing health, continuing cutbacks in traditional corporations, the wobbly ineffectiveness of government, lack of energy for the distribution system, destructive weather, and changes in the earth will take their toll. And then a few paragraphs down, they say, gradually, as fewer and fewer people drive to work in the city every day, to grocery stores for food, to schools or nursery centers, to the shopping mall, the restaurant, or the theater for an evening out, the demand for mass-produced goods and cars will drop to a fraction of its present demand. And then a few paragraphs after that, they say, without revenues, the collapsing governments will be unable to repair and maintain the system of superhighways for the handful of cars still traveling these roads. You will see a scattering of money into various areas of transportation in the hope of somehow making these systems work well enough to keep things moving. But once they are unable to guarantee the safety of those who use those roads by providing police to monitor the traffic, the use of cars will drop even further. End quote. So just a note here, the interstate highway system was put in place to make it easy to move troops, big guns, and armored equipment quickly and easily back and forth across the continent if needed. But weaponry and military strategies are changing dramatically. And in the not too distant future, there will be no big guns, armored equipment, or troops to move. Everything will be fought with plasma energy, often called laser technology or beam weaponry. The shrunken government will not be able to maintain the big highway system that we all take for granted, nor will they have a reason to do so. Anyway, here we are, 40 years after they showed me this, and all of the, quote, troubling forces that they talked about are unfolding. The looming water and food shortages, the health problems, the corporate cutbacks, ineffective government, threats to our energy infrastructure, destructive weather. We're facing all of it. So I hope we don't forget that on the other side of this is a whole new world. That world has nutrient-dense food and drink that heals continuously. It has water that nurtures all of life. Sometimes just the water will do the healing. Governance systems that are much, much smaller and more intimately organized. And government that fosters consensus at many levels. Energy will come from harnessing the energy of the cosmos, that limitless ocean of energy we all float in. We will have the ability to modify weather, but we'll do it wisely and well. But when I go looking into the future, I have not seen cars or the personal automobile in that world. Could we accelerate the blossoming of the new world by daydreaming about a totally new way of living that is close to Mother Nature and enjoys phenomenally wonderful technology that enhances our evolution toward becoming people of great wisdom, great power, beauty, and truth? Lastly, number 19, many groups have wanted to control the world and be at the top of the power pile. But I think it's time for us, the ordinary people who are not so ordinary after all, to expand consciousness to the point that we get our mental and emotional shovels out and spread that pile around. Take responsibility for shaping the landscape, adding our own touches, and help to manage the world we want to live in. It's time to come down from the power pile we've been climbing and spread out in a big circle that holds all life as worthwhile and needed, because it is. Each of us is unique, and that is the gift we bring to the circle. So that's it for this look-see. For those who are watching or listening for the first time, the look-see is a brief look at what's happening in our world and where the big trends are headed. Reality is not fixed. It is very dynamic, and it changes according to what we are doing with our consciousness. Nothing becomes real, until we make it real. And we do that by making a choice, by taking some kind of action, putting something together, or taking it apart. Those decisive actions are what determine the path and the outcome. And of course, once we set something in motion, it does take a lot to make a change or get things going in another direction. And that's the exact reason for looking ahead. If we don't like the direction things are going, we can make appropriate changes in a timely way or prepare for what might look inevitable. If we see something we like, we can put some conscious attention on that outcome and help things along. So let me say, it's important to look ahead and assess what's happening and where we are going so we know whether or not we need to do something different. So thank you so much for listening. Have a Merry Christmas and a great month. See you in January.